I never thought a set of tire chains would land me in the middle of a legal battle. But that's exactly what happened when Patricia Hendricks became the new president of the Timber Ridge Homeowners Association in Flagstaff, Arizona. It started on a Tuesday morning in late November when I found a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door. The thing practically glowed against the dark wood, impossible to miss. I was on my way out to my truck, coffee in hand, when I saw it flapping in the cold wind that had been battering our neighborhood since the previous night. I yanked it off and read it while standing on my porch, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Violation notice. Unapproved automotive equipment visible from street. Item in question. Tire chain stored in truck bed. Fine. $150. Repeat violations will result in escalating fines and potential legal action. I read it 3 times, convinced I was misunderstanding something. My tire chains were sitting in the bed of my Ford F-250, neatly coiled and secured with a bungee cord. We lived at 7,200 feet elevation, and winter storms could dump 2 feet of snow overnight. Those chains weren't decorative. They were survival equipment. I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office number listed on the notice. A woman answered on the second ring, her voice clipped and professional. Timber Ridge HOA, this is Donna speaking. Yeah, hi. This is Ethan Mallory from 847 Ponderosa Drive. I just got a violation notice about tire chains in my truck, and I think there's been some kind of mistake. No mistake, Mr. Mallory. The new regulations were approved at last month's board meeting. All automotive equipment must be stored out of sight when not in active use. Active use. They're in my truck bed because that's where I keep them during winter. I might need them any day now. Then you'll need to retrieve them from your garage when weather conditions warrant their use. The regulations are quite clear. I felt heat rising in my chest despite the cold morning air. Who decided this? I've lived here for 6 years and never had a problem before. Mrs. Hendricks is implementing a comprehensive beautification initiative. The full regulations are available on the community website. Have a nice day, Mr. Mallory. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there on my porch, staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. The tire chains were black rubber and steel, barely noticeable unless you walked right up to the truck. They didn't exactly scream eyesore. I went back inside and pulled up the HOA website on my laptop. Sure enough, buried in a 12-page document titled Community Standards Enhancement Initiative was a section on automotive equipment. It prohibited visible storage of tire chains, tow straps, jerry cans, roof racks when not in use, and about 20 other items. The document was dated October 15th, and according to the meeting minutes, it had passed by a vote of 3-2. Patricia Hendricks, the new president, had been the driving force behind it. I'd met Patricia once briefly at a neighborhood cookout back in July. She'd moved into the community from Phoenix earlier that year, taking over a house 3 streets away after her divorce. She was in her late 40s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of rigid posture that suggested she'd never had a casual day in her life. At the cookout, she'd spent most of her time complaining about minor code violations she'd noticed around the neighborhood. I remembered thinking she seemed like the type who measured her grass with a ruler. The fine was due within 30 days. I could pay it and move the chains to my garage, but something about the whole situation gnawed at me. It felt like overreach, like someone exercising authority just because they could. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting and voice my concerns like a reasonable adult. The meeting was held on the first Thursday of December in the community center, a modest building near the neighborhood entrance. When I arrived at 7 in the evening, About 15 other homeowners were already seated in the folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table where the board sat. Patricia occupied the center position, flanked by two other board members I recognized, but didn't know well. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel that seemed unnecessarily dramatic. She worked through the standard agenda items with mechanical efficiency, approving minutes, discussing budget allocations, and addressing maintenance concerns. When she finally opened the floor for homeowner comments, I raised my hand. "Yes, Mr. Mallory," she said, consulting a paper in front of her. "I see you're here regarding your recent violation notice." I stood up, keeping my voice level. I wanted to discuss the new regulations about automotive equipment. I understand the desire to maintain community standards, but tire chains are safety equipment. We live in a mountain community with severe winter weather. It doesn't make sense to require people to store them inside when they might need them on short notice. Patricia's expression didn't change. "The regulations apply equally to all residents, Mr. Mallory. If you need your chains, you can take a few minutes to retrieve them from your garage before driving. The purpose of these rules is to maintain property values and ensure our community looks pristine." But what about people who need to leave quickly in an emergency? What if there's already snow on the ground and they can't safely get to their garage? Then they should have prepared earlier. Personal responsibility is something we encourage here at Timber Ridge. A few other homeowners murmured in agreement, though I noticed several looked uncomfortable. An older man 2 rows ahead of me raised his hand. "I have to side with Ethan on this one," he said. "Last February, we got 18 inches overnight. I needed my chains just to get out of my driveway. If I'd had to go digging through my garage first, I'd have been there all day." Patricia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The regulations have been duly approved by the board. If you wish to propose amendments, you may do so in writing, and they will be considered at a future meeting. However, I should mention that enforcement of current regulations will continue regardless of any pending proposals." I sat back down, frustrated but not surprised. I recognized a brick wall when I hit one. After the meeting, a few homeowners approached me in the parking lot, expressing similar concerns about various aspects of Patricia's new regulations. Apparently, the tire chain thing was just the tip of the iceberg. She'd also implemented rules about holiday decorations, front porch furniture, and even what types of plants people could have in their yards. She fined me $100 because my doormat was burgundy instead of an approved neutral color. A woman named Sandra told me. "I've had that doormat for 3 years. I drove home that night feeling a knot of dread in my stomach. I had 2 choices, pay the fine and comply or fight it. Fighting meant legal fees, time, and stress. But complying meant letting Patricia turn our neighborhood into some kind of sterile showroom where actual human beings couldn't live normal lives. I paid the fine. I moved the chains to my garage. And I spent the next 2 weeks stewing about it, while December brought increasingly ominous weather forecasts. Flagstaff winters are no joke. The city averages over 100 inches of snow annually, and our subdivision, being at a higher elevation than downtown, typically got even more. The meteorologists started talking about a major system moving in from the Pacific around December 18th. The predictions varied, but most agreed we were looking at significant snowfall, possibly followed by freezing rain. On the morning of December 17th, I woke to gray skies and air so cold it hurt to breathe. I checked my weather app while drinking coffee. Winter storm warning beginning at 6 p.m. tonight, lasting through tomorrow afternoon. Predicted snowfall, 12 to 20 inches, with wind gusts up to 40 miles per hour. I had to work that day, but I made sure to put my tire chains in the truck bed before I left, buried under a tarp so they wouldn't be visible. If Patricia wanted to cite me during a blizzard, she could knock herself out. I worked as a civil engineer for the county, and our office was downtown. The day passed in a blur of last-minute project reviews and preparations for the storm. By the time I left at 4:30, the first flakes were starting to fall, fat and heavy, the kind that meant business. Traffic was chaotic, everyone trying to get home before the worst hit. I made it back to Timber Ridge by 5:15. The snow was already accumulating, maybe an inch on the ground and falling faster by the minute. I pulled into my driveway, got the chains out from under the tarp, and spent 15 minutes in the growing storm installing them on my truck's rear tires. By the time I finished, my hands were numb despite my gloves, and visibility had dropped to maybe 100 feet. Inside, I made dinner and settled in for the evening, watching the snow pile up outside my windows. The wind howled, driving the snow sideways, creating drifts that swallowed landscape features. By 9 o'clock, my front yard looked like an Arctic wasteland. I could barely make out the shape of my truck in the driveway. Around 10, I was getting ready for bed when my phone rang. Unknown local number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello, is this Ethan Mallory?" A woman's voice, strained and unfamiliar. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Patricia Hendricks. I'm the HOA president." "I apologize for calling so late, but I'm in a difficult situation, and I noticed you have a truck with chains on it." I sat down on my couch, processing this. "What kind of situation?" "I went out earlier this evening to check on a property near the neighborhood entrance. There were concerns about a possible roof collapse. On my way back, I slid off the road into a drainage ditch. I'm not hurt, but my car is stuck, and I can't get it out. The tow companies are all overwhelmed with calls and saying it could be morning before they can reach me." The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd fined me for having tire chains visible now needed help because she didn't have them. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. "Where exactly are you?" "About half a mile from the main entrance on Elk Ridge Road." My car is a silver Lexus SUV, though I doubt you'll be able to see the color in this weather. "I know the area. There's a drainage culvert there. Did you go into that?" "Yes. The front end is down in it pretty significantly." I looked out my window at the storm. Going out in this was stupid and potentially dangerous, but leaving someone stuck in a ditch overnight in below-zero temperatures was worse, even if that someone was Patricia Hendricks. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Stay in your car with the engine running if you can. Keep warm." "Thank you, Mr. Mallory. I really appreciate this." I hung up and started layering on cold weather gear. Heavy-duty winter coat, insulated boots, thick gloves, a headlamp. I grabbed a tow strap from my garage along with a shovel. The tire chains that Patricia had wanted me to hide away were about to justify their existence. The drive to Elk Ridge Road was treacherous even with chains. The snow was already more than 6 inches deep and still coming down hard. My headlights barely penetrated the swirling white. I crept along at maybe 10 miles per hour, following the dim outlines of trees and mailboxes to stay oriented. The wind rocked my truck, and once or twice I felt the back end slip despite the chains. I found Patricia's Lexus exactly where she described, nose down in the ditch at about a 30-degree angle. The back end was still partially on the road, hazard lights blinking weakly through the snow. I pulled up alongside and got out, immediately getting hit by a wall of wind and snow that nearly knocked me over. Patricia opened her door as I approached. She looked miserable, her perfect hair disheveled, her expensive coat covered in snow. "Thank you for coming," she shouted over the wind. I didn't know who else to call. "Let me assess the situation," I yelled back. "Stay in the car." I made my way around to the front of the Lexus, using my headlamp to examine how badly it was stuck. The front wheels were suspended over the culvert, the undercarriage resting on the edge. The rear wheels were technically still on solid ground, but they dug themselves into ruts trying to get free. This wasn't going to be a simple tow. I went back to my truck and pulled out the tow strap, then returned to Patricia's car and knocked on her window. "I need you to put it in neutral. I'm going to try to pull you backward, but you're pretty wedged in there. It might take a few attempts." She nodded, looking scared. "Will it damage my car?" "It might, but the alternative is leaving it here until morning, and the way this storm's going, it could be buried by then. Plus, another car could hit it in low visibility." "Okay, do what you need to do." I attached one end of the tow strap to the Lexus's rear towing hook and the other to my truck's hitch. Then I got back in my cab, said a quick prayer, and started backing up slowly. The strap went taut. My truck strained, engine growling. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding sound I felt in my bones, the Lexus started moving, inch by inch, backward out of the ditch. It took 3 tries and nearly 20 minutes, but eventually I got her car back on the road surface. The front bumper was scraped and dented, and the undercarriage had definitely taken a beating, but the vehicle was intact and mobile. Patricia got out and inspected the damage with her phone's flashlight, her expression hard to read. "It could have been worse," I said, coiling up the tow strap. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Mallory. I mean that sincerely." She paused, looking like she wanted to say something else, but the wind was howling so loud it was hard to have a conversation. "I should get home before this gets any worse. Follow me back. I'll go slow. Don't try to accelerate too quickly, and if you start to slide, steer into it, not against it." She nodded, getting back in her car. I led the way back through the subdivision, checking my rearview mirror constantly to make sure she was still behind me. The snow had deepened considerably even in the short time we'd been out there. We made it back to our respective houses without further incident, and I watched her taillights disappear down her street before pulling into my own driveway. Inside, I peeled off my wet layers and made hot chocolate, my hands slowly regaining feeling. I just saved the woman who'd fined me $150 for having tire chains visible. The woman who probably would have avoided the whole situation if she'd had chains herself. I wondered if she saw the irony. I wondered if it would change anything. The storm continued through the night and into the next day. By Friday afternoon, when it finally cleared, Timber Ridge had received 19 inches of snow. The plows worked overtime to clear the main roads, but the subdivision streets wouldn't be fully cleared for days. I spent Saturday digging out my driveway and helping a few neighbors do the same. I didn't hear from Patricia for 3 days. Then, on Monday evening, I found a handwritten note in my mailbox. "Dear Mr. Mallory, I wanted to thank you again for your assistance during the storm. Your quick response and competence likely saved me from a very difficult situation. I've been reflecting on the circumstances that led to my predicament, and I believe we should discuss the HOA regulations regarding automotive equipment. Would you be willing to meet with me this week? Patricia Hendricks." Her phone number was written at the bottom. I stared at the note, surprised. This wasn't what I'd expected. I called her that evening. "Mr. Mallory, thank you for getting back to me," she said when she answered. She sounded different, less rigid. "I was hoping we could meet somewhere and talk. Perhaps the coffee shop on Milton Road. Sure, when works for you." "Tomorrow at 10. I'll be there." The coffee shop was a local place called Mountain Grounds, popular with the college crowd. I arrived a few minutes early and ordered a black coffee, then found a table near the back. Patricia showed up right at 10, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of the business casual attire I usually saw her in. She looked more human somehow. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sitting down across from me with her own coffee. "I wanted to apologize. Not just for the inconvenience I caused you, but for the broader situation with the HOA regulations." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not what I expected to hear." "I imagine not. The truth is, when I moved here after my divorce, I was angry and controlling. My ex-husband had an affair, and I felt like my entire life had fallen apart. Moving to Flagstaff was supposed to be a fresh start, but I brought all that anger with me. I channeled it into the HOA presidency, thinking if I could control the community, I could control something in my life." She took a sip of coffee, her hands wrapped around the cup. "Being stuck in that ditch, calling you for help after I'd find you, it forced me to confront how ridiculous I've been. Those tire chains might have kept me out of trouble in the first place. And beyond that, I've been making my neighbors miserable over doormats and porch furniture. It's absurd." I didn't know what to say. This level of self-awareness was rare, especially from someone in Patricia's position. "I appreciate you saying that," I finally responded. "The regulations have been frustrating for a lot of people. We chose to live in a mountain community, and that comes with practical realities." "Exactly. I was trying to impose Phoenix standards on a Flagstaff neighborhood. It doesn't work." She leaned forward. "I want to propose a revision to the regulations at the next board meeting. Specifically, I want to eliminate the restrictions on safety equipment like tire chains, tow straps, and similar items. And I want to relax some of the other standards to be more reasonable. But I'd like your input on what makes sense from a practical standpoint." Over the next hour, we talked through the various regulations. Some made sense, like restrictions on commercial vehicles or derelict cars. Others, like the doormat color requirements and the ban on visible tire chains, were clearly overreach. Patricia took notes on her phone, asking thoughtful questions and actually listening to my answers. "I'll draft a proposal and send it to you before I present it to the board," she said as we wrapped up. "And Mr. Mallory, about that fine I issued you, I'm going to refund it. It was unjust and I should never have sent it in the first place. You don't have to do that." "Yes, I do. It's the right thing to do." We parted ways with a handshake, and I drove home feeling cautiously optimistic. People didn't usually change this dramatically, but the experience in the storm seemed to have genuinely affected Patricia. Maybe something good would come of it. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday, January 4th. I made sure to attend, along with what looked like twice the usual number of homeowners. Word had gotten around that Patricia was proposing changes, and people were interested. Patricia opened the meeting efficiently, working through the standard agenda before introducing her proposal. She'd titled it Practical Standards Amendment, and it systematically walked through each of the controversial regulations, explaining why they needed revision. The tire chain restriction was first. "After careful consideration and personal experience," she said, with what might have been the ghost of a smile in my direction, "it's clear that requiring safety equipment to be stored out of sight during winter months is impractical and potentially dangerous. I propose we amend the regulations to allow visible storage of tire chains, tow straps, and similar emergency equipment from November through March." One of the other board members, a man named Richard, frowned. "But Patricia, you were the one who pushed for these standards in the first place." "What changed?" "I learned that rigid rules don't account for real-world conditions. Our community needs regulations that support safety and practicality, not just aesthetics." The discussion went on for nearly an hour. Richard and another board member, Susan, pushed back on various points, arguing that relaxing the standards would lead to a decline in property values. But Patricia held firm, and she'd clearly done her homework. She had data on property values in similar communities with less restrictive HOAs, showing no significant difference. She had feedback from several homeowners about the practical problems the regulations had caused. She'd even consulted with a local attorney to ensure the amendments were properly structured. When the vote finally came, it passed 3-2, the same margin that had approved the original regulations. Patricia had convinced the other board member who'd been on the fence, a younger woman named Jennifer who'd apparently been having her own issues with the doormat rules. The room erupted in quiet applause. Patricia caught my eye and nodded slightly. I nodded back. Over the next few weeks, life in Timber Ridge gradually returned to normal, or rather, to a new normal that was more livable than what Patricia had initially tried to impose. The refund for my fine showed up as a check in my mailbox, along with another handwritten note thanking me again. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. In late January, I was at home on a Saturday afternoon when there was a sharp knock on my door. I opened it to find two people in professional attire, a man in his 50s with gray hair and a younger woman with a briefcase. Ethan Mallory. The man asked, "That's me. I'm Detective Frank Morrison with the Flagstaff Police Department, and this is Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Chen. We'd like to ask you some questions about Patricia Hendricks and the Timber Ridge HOA." My stomach dropped. "What's this about? May we come in?" I led them to my living room, my mind racing. Had something happened to Patricia? Had she done something illegal? Detective Morrison pulled out a notebook. "We're investigating allegations of financial impropriety within the Timber Ridge HOA. Your name came up in our inquiries as someone who might have relevant information." Financial impropriety? I don't know anything about the HOA's finances. What about the fine you received in November? We understand Mrs. Hendricks later refunded it. Yes, that's correct. She issued a violation notice about tire chains in my truck. It was $150. After she had car trouble during the storm and I helped her, she reconsidered the regulation and refunded my fine. That's all I know. The ADA, Rebecca Chen, leaned forward. "Mr. Mallory, were you aware that during Mrs. Hendricks's tenure as HOA president, which began in August of last year, the total amount collected in fines increased by over 400%. No, but that doesn't surprise me. She implemented a lot of new regulations and was aggressive about enforcement. The total collected was approximately $47,000 over 5 months. The HOA's annual budget is roughly $200,000, mostly for maintenance and common area upkeep. That's a significant influx of fine revenue." I was starting to see where this was going. "You think she was embezzling?" "We think the fine structure may have been implemented specifically to generate revenue that could be misappropriated," Detective Morrison said. "We're in the early stages of the investigation, but we've identified several irregularities in the HOA accounts. Mrs. Hendricks had sole signing authority on the operating account, which is itself unusual and potentially a violation of the HOA's bylaws. Have you talked to Patricia about this? We've attempted to contact her multiple times. She's not responding to our calls or messages. We went by her residence this morning, and a neighbor indicated she left town a few days ago. Didn't say where she was going or when she'd be back. This was getting worse by the minute." The woman who'd written me a heartfelt apology note 3 weeks ago had apparently been stealing from the HOA and was now potentially on the run. "I really don't know anything beyond what I've told you," I said. "I had minimal contact with Patricia outside of the fine situation, and the meeting where she amended the regulations. Rebecca Chen handed me a business card. If you think of anything else or if Mrs. Hendricks contacts you, please call me immediately. This is a serious matter. If our investigation confirms embezzlement, she'll be facing criminal charges. After they left, I sat on my couch for a long time trying to make sense of it all. Had Patricia's apology been genuine, or had she been playing me? The timeline bothered me. She'd seemed sincere at the coffee shop and during the board meeting. But then she disappeared right as the investigation was heating up. I called Sandra, the woman who'd complained about the doormat fine, figuring she might know more. "Oh, it's a whole mess," she said when I explained what the police had told me. Apparently, someone noticed the HOA account balance was lower than it should be and requested a full audit. That's when they discovered money was missing. Not just missing, but transferred out to an account in Patricia's name. She'd been taking money a little at a time since September. How much total? I heard it was close to $30,000. And here's the really crazy part. The fine revenue wasn't even being deposited into the HOA account. She was collecting checks and depositing them into a separate account she'd set up. That's why it took so long to notice. I felt sick. So all those fines, the ones she collected from you, from me, from everyone else, they were basically just going straight to her. Looks that way. I feel like an idiot. I paid $100 for a doormat violation and it just went into her pocket. After hanging up with Sandra, I tried to process the implications. Patricia had created an elaborate scheme: implement harsh regulations, fine people aggressively, and pocket the money. The personal apology to me, the amended regulations, all of it might have been damage control when she realized people were getting angry enough to look closely at the finances. Or maybe I was being too cynical. Maybe she genuinely felt guilty and tried to make things right, but the investigation had spooked her into running. Either way, she was gone, and the HOA was in chaos. Over the next week, the story dominated conversation in Timber Ridge. The board called an emergency meeting to address the situation. An interim president was appointed, an accountant named Harold who lived near the community center. He promised full transparency and an independent audit. The audit results came back in mid-February. The total amount missing was $31,400. Patricia had set up a separate account called Timber Ridge Community Enhancement Fund and had been depositing fine payments into it. She'd then been transferring money from that account to her personal account in regular increments. The scheme was fairly unsophisticated, which suggested she'd either been desperate or had never expected anyone to look closely. The Flagstaff police issued a warrant for her arrest on charges of theft and fraud. Her photo appeared in the local news. I stared at it on my phone, this woman who'd sat across from me at Mountain Grounds and seemed so genuinely remorseful. Had any of it been real, in March, I got a call from Detective Morrison. "We found her," he said. "She was staying with her sister in Tucson. She's been arrested and is being extradited back to Flagstaff. The arraignment is scheduled for next week. Given your previous interactions with her, we thought you'd want to know. Is she cooperating? Her attorney has indicated she intends to plead guilty. She apparently wants to take responsibility and negotiate a plea deal." The arraignment was held on March 15th at the Coconino County Superior Court. I took the morning off work to attend, not entirely sure why I felt compelled to be there. The courtroom was about half full, mostly with other Timber Ridge residents who'd been affected by Patricia's scheme. When Patricia was led in, she looked diminished somehow. She wore a simple gray suit and no makeup. Her perfect hair was pulled back in a plain ponytail. She didn't look around the courtroom or make eye contact with anyone. The judge, A stern woman named Judge Carolyn Porter reviewed the charges. Mrs. Hendricks, you're charged with theft and fraud in connection with your role as president of the Timber Ridge Homeowners Association. I understand you wish to enter a plea. Patricia's attorney, a public defender, stood. Yes, Your Honor, my client wishes to plead guilty to all charges. Mrs. Hendricks, is this your wish? Patricia stood, her voice quiet but clear. Yes, Your Honor, I did what I'm accused of. I want to take responsibility. Judge Porter looked at her for a long moment. Very well. I'll accept your guilty plea. However, before we proceed to sentencing, I want to understand the circumstances. Mrs. Hendricks, what possessed you to steal from your own community? Patricia took a shaky breath. After my divorce, I was in financial trouble. My ex-husband left me with significant debt, and I was struggling to make ends meet. When I became HOA president, I saw an opportunity. It started small, just one fine that I kept instead of depositing. But then it became easier to justify. I told myself I deserved it, that I was working hard for the community. It spiraled out of control. And the attempts to amend the regulations in January, was that genuine remorse or an attempt to avoid detection? It was genuine, Your Honor. A resident helped me during the snowstorm, someone I'd treated unfairly. It made me realize what I'd become. I wanted to make things right, but I was terrified of being caught for what I'd already done. When I heard about the audit, I panicked and ran. That was stupid and cowardly. The judge nodded slowly. Mrs. Hendricks, you're clearly intelligent and capable. What you did was serious, but I appreciate your willingness to accept responsibility. I'm going to order a pre-sentence investigation and schedule sentencing for 60 days from now. Until then, you'll be released on your own recognizance, but you're not to leave Coconino County. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Patricia was led out of the courtroom. As she passed the gallery, her eyes briefly met mine. There was shame there and resignation, but also something that might have been gratitude. Then she was gone. I left the courthouse feeling conflicted. Patricia had committed a real crime and hurt a lot of people, but I couldn't help feeling that her story was more complicated than simple villainy. The divorce, the financial pressure, the need for control that had manifested in both the draconian HOA rules and the embezzlement. None of it excused what she'd done, but it helped me understand it. The Timber Ridge HOA spent the next few months recovering. Harold, the interim president, proved to be competent and reasonable. He worked with a committee of volunteers to completely overhaul the HOA's governance structure, implementing checks and balances that would prevent any one person from having unilateral authority over finances. The bylaws were amended to require multiple signatures on all transactions over $500 and mandatory quarterly audits. The community also had to deal with the financial loss. The $31,400 Patricia had stolen was a significant chunk of the operating budget. Harold worked with the insurance company and an attorney to recover as much as possible, and eventually, they were able to recoup about half through the HOA's fidelity bond. The rest had to be addressed through a special assessment. Each homeowner was charged about $185 to make up the shortfall. It was frustrating, but most people understood the necessity. In May, Patricia's sentencing hearing was scheduled. The pre-sentence investigation had painted a picture of a woman whose life had fallen apart through a combination of bad luck and poor choices. She had no prior criminal record. She'd been a respected real estate agent in Phoenix before the divorce. Her ex-husband's affair and subsequent abandonment had left her emotionally devastated and financially underwater. I attended the sentencing hearing along with several other Timber Ridge residents. The prosecutor recommended 18 months in prison followed by probation. Patricia's attorney argued for probation only, pointing to her guilty plea, her cooperation, and her lack of criminal history. Judge Porter listened to both sides, then addressed Patricia directly. Mrs. Hendricks, you violated the trust of your community in a fundamental way. People elected you to lead, and you used that position to steal from them. That said, I believe in rehabilitation, and I believe you're genuinely remorseful. I'm going to sentence you to 6 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation. You'll also be required to pay full restitution of $31,400 to be paid in monthly installments over the course of your probation. Additionally, you'll complete 200 hours of community service. If you violate the terms of your probation, you'll serve the remainder of the sentence behind bars. Do you understand? Patricia nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, Your Honor, thank you. She was led away to begin her sentence immediately. 6 months in county jail wasn't nothing, but it was far less than she could have received. I suspected the judge had been influenced by Patricia's genuine remorse and her difficult circumstances. As I left the courthouse, Rebecca Chen, the Ada, caught up with me in the parking lot. Mr. Mallory, I wanted to thank you for your cooperation during the investigation. Your information helped us establish the timeline. I didn't really do much. You'd be surprised how many people don't cooperate in cases like this. They see it as not their problem or don't want to get involved. She paused. For what it's worth, I think Judge Porter got the sentence right. Patricia Hendricks isn't a career criminal. She made serious mistakes during a difficult period of her life. 6 months will give her time to reflect, and the restitution ensures the community is made whole. Will she be able to pay it back? That's a lot of money. That's up to her. If she complies with the payment plan, she'll be fine. If she doesn't, she goes back to jail. It's a strong incentive to stay on the right track. Summer arrived, and life in Timber Ridge continued its slow return to normal. The new HOA board was functioning smoothly. Harold had decided to run for president officially in the annual election, and no one opposed him. The draconian regulations were officially repealed and replaced with a much more reasonable set of standards. Property values, contrary to Richard's dire predictions, remained stable. I kept my tire chains in my truck bed all through the following winter, visible for anyone to see. No one complained. In December, almost exactly a year after I'd pulled Patricia's Lexus out of the ditch, I was at the grocery store when I saw her in the produce section. She looked different, thinner, with her hair cut short, wearing jeans and a simple jacket. She saw me at the same moment I saw her, and for a second I thought she might turn and walk away. Instead, she approached. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I was hoping I might run into you eventually. I wanted to apologize again in person." "You don't need to apologize to me again. You already did." "Yes, I do. You helped me when I was stuck in that storm, even after I'd treated you unfairly. And then I betrayed the trust of everyone in the community, including you. I think about that a lot." She looked down at her hands. "I finished my jail sentence last month. I'm working 2 jobs now trying to pay back the restitution. It'll take me the full 3 years probably, but I'm committed to making it right." "What are you doing for work?" "I'm waiting tables at a restaurant downtown, and I clean houses on weekends. It's humbling, but honest. Better than what I was doing." "Are you staying in Flagstaff?" "For now. I had to sell my house in Timber Ridge. I couldn't afford it anymore, and honestly, I didn't feel right living there after what I did. I have a small apartment near the university. It's enough." We talked for a few more minutes, an awkward but not unfriendly conversation. Patricia told me she was seeing a therapist and working through the issues that had led her to make such poor choices. She seemed genuine, but then again, she'd seemed genuine before. I wanted to believe people could change, but I was also realistic about human nature. "I hope things work out for you," I said finally. "Thank you. And Ethan, about those tire chains. You were right. Sometimes practicality has to take priority over appearances. I learned that the hard way." She smiled slightly, a sad but real smile, and then she was gone, disappearing into the crowded store. Driving home, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. A simple dispute over tire chains had led to a rescue in a snowstorm, an embezzlement investigation, a criminal conviction, and now a chance encounter in a grocery store. Life was strange that way. Actions had consequences, sometimes obvious and sometimes not. Patricia had learned that lesson expensively. As for me, I'd learned something too. I'd learned that standing up to unjust rules mattered, even when it was easier to comply. I'd learned that people were complicated, capable of both genuine remorse and serious wrongdoing. And I'd learned that sometimes helping someone, even someone who'd wronged you, was still the right thing to do. The Timber Ridge HOA continued to function under Harold's steady leadership. He wasn't flashy or dramatic. He didn't implement sweeping changes or grand initiatives. He just made sure the streets got plowed, the common areas were maintained, and the residents were treated fairly. It was boring in the best possible way. The following spring, the HOA held a community meeting to discuss the upcoming year's budget. I attended, as I'd made a habit of doing since the Patricia situation. As Harold wrapped up the financial presentation, a woman in the back raised her hand. "I just want to say, I'm grateful for how this board handled the embezzlement situation. It could have torn the community apart, but instead, everyone worked together to recover. That says something good about us." There was a murmur of agreement around the room. Harold nodded. "We're a community. That means we look out for each other, even when things get difficult." I think we all learned something from what happened. Transparency matters, accountability matters, and treating each other with respect matters most of all. After the meeting, as people filed out into the warm evening air, I chatted with Sandra about her garden plans for the summer. She was talking about putting in raised beds for vegetables, something the old regulations would never have allowed. Now, as long as they weren't in the front yard and were maintained reasonably, no one cared. "It's nice to feel like we can actually live here," she said. For a while there, it felt like we were just maintaining a museum. I knew exactly what she meant. A neighborhood wasn't supposed to be perfect. It was supposed to be home. As I walked back to my house in the fading light, I passed my truck in the driveway. The tire chains were coiled neatly in the bed, exactly where they belonged. Ready for the next storm whenever it came. Not hidden away in a garage somewhere, not in violation of anyone's idea of what a pristine community should look like. Just there, practical and visible and honest. I went inside, made dinner, and settled in for the evening. Outside my window, Timber Ridge continued its quiet existence. Families walking dogs, kids riding bikes, neighbors waving to each other across lawns. Normal, imperfect human life. It wasn't a dramatic ending. Patricia was out there somewhere, working her 2 jobs and paying back what she'd stolen. The HOA was functioning properly for the first time in over a year. I was going about my normal routine, work and home and the occasional community meeting. But sometimes the best endings are the quiet ones. The ones where people learn from their mistakes, systems are fixed, and life goes on a little bit better than it was before. That's what happened in Timber Ridge. We'd been through something difficult, and we'd come out the other side wiser and more united. The tire chain stayed in my truck bed through that spring and summer and into the next fall. When winter came again, I was ready. We all were. And this time, when the storms hit, We faced them together, as a real community should. I saw Patricia one more time, about 2 years after the sentencing. I was having coffee at Mountain Grounds when she came in, looking healthier than the last time I'd seen her. She noticed me and hesitated, then came over. "Hi, Ethan. Mind if I sit for a minute?" "Go ahead." She sat down, her hands wrapped around a takeout cup. "I wanted you to know I made my last restitution payment yesterday. 3 years exactly as scheduled. I'm done with probation." "That's good. Congratulations." "It's been the hardest 3 years of my life, but also the most important. I'm not the person I was when I moved to Flagstaff. I'm not even the person I was when I got out of jail. I'm better. Not perfect, but better." "What are you going to do now?" "I'm moving to Prescott. Fresh start again. I got a job with a nonprofit that helps people dealing with financial crisis. Turns out my experience with bankruptcy and recovery is actually useful." "Who knew?" There was a lightness to her that hadn't been there before. The weight of her crime and punishment had been lifted, and she seemed genuinely at peace. "I'm glad things are working out," I said, and I meant it. "Me too. And Ethan, I know I've said this before, but thank you. For helping me that night in the storm, for not being vindictive when you could have been, for being a decent person. It mattered. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after." She smiled. "That's what my therapist keeps saying. I'm finally starting to believe it." We talked for a few more minutes, then she stood to leave. "Take care of yourself, Ethan, and keep those tire chains handy. You never know when someone might need them." "I will." And then she was gone, out the door and into whatever future she was building for herself. I hoped it was a good one. I finished my coffee and headed home, driving through the familiar streets of Timber Ridge. The subdivision had weathered a storm of a different kind and had emerged stronger for it. The HOA functioned smoothly now, a model of transparent governance. The residents looked out for each other, knowing we'd all been through something together. As for me, I continued my quiet life. Work, home, the occasional HOA meeting where nothing dramatic ever happened anymore. It was exactly what I wanted. Boring, stable, predictable. Safe. The tire chains stayed in my truck, a reminder of everything that had happened. They represented practicality over appearance, preparation over panic, and the importance of standing up for common sense even when faced with arbitrary authority. They also reminded me that helping someone in need was always the right choice, regardless of history or grudges. Patricia had wronged me and many others, but when she needed help, I'd provided it. That decision had led to her moment of clarity, her attempt at redemption, and ultimately her path to becoming a better person. I couldn't take credit for her choices, but I'd played a small part in giving her the opportunity to make them. Life went on in Timber Ridge, season after season, storm after storm. The community grew stronger, the HOA served its purpose without overreach, and neighbors became friends. It was everything a homeowners association should be. A tool for collective good, not a weapon for petty control. And somewhere in Prescott, Patricia was helping people avoid the financial mistakes she'd made. She was giving back, making amends in a broader sense. It was a form of restitution that couldn't be measured in dollars, but perhaps mattered even more. The story could have ended differently. Patricia could have remained bitter and unrepentant. The community could have fractured under the weight of betrayal. I could have refused to help her that night in the storm, leaving her to face the consequences of her unprepared driving. Any of those paths would have led somewhere darker. Instead, we all made choices that led to growth and healing. Imperfect choices sometimes, but ultimately ones that moved us forward rather than backward. As I pulled into my driveway that final evening, I looked at those tire chains one more time. They were worn now, scratched and weathered from years of use. But they were reliable, honest, functional. Everything they needed to be and nothing more, just like the community around me, just like the life I'd built. Imperfect but good, practical and real. And that was enough.